giving a glare to the people in the courtroom before breaking into tears as she made her first court appearance. This mom is accused of killing her 12-year-old daughter a year ago and hiding her body in a box. That girl, Jacqueline Torres, was found in a container behind a vacant home just last week.
Jacqueline likely died in the fall of 2024 while her family was still residing in Farmington. Evidence indicates that Jacqueline was the victim of prolonged physical abuse and malnourishment prior to her death.
Also in court today, the mom's sister and boyfriend. They are also accused in this alleged twisted case of deadly child abuse. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. We cover a lot of tough stories here on the case and on Law&Crime, and if you're watching this, you probably know that. But there's sometimes, especially in cases involving children, where we come across something and you're at a loss for words. And the only word that comes to mind in this case is evil. Now, of course, Karla Garcia is innocent until proven guilty, and that also goes for her boyfriend and her sister, who are also facing charges in this case. I'll get to them in just a moment. Today, Garcia and the two others made their first appearances in court in Connecticut. Garcia entered the courtroom where people were wearing outfits in support of her now dead daughter. She shot somewhat of a glance to people who were sitting there. She then faced forward, and it looked like she was breathing heavy, and then she started to weep at one point. Now here's a picture of the girl at the center of this story. This is a girl who deserves so much more and so much better in her 12 years on this earth. Her name was Jacqueline Torres. People called her Mimi. Now we know that she lived with her mom, Karla Garcia, because Karla Garcia had custody of Mimi. It is unclear the last time Jacqueline Torres was in school. Now, it was outside this vacant, rundown home in New Britain, Connecticut on Wednesday last week that someone called 911 and police came upon a container. It was a container that had the remains of Jacqueline Torres inside. Police say that Torres's body was badly decomposed, and here's more of what authorities said about what they believe happened to this young girl per WTNH TV.
Investigators from the Farmington Police Department, with the assistance from the New Britain Police Department, have determined that Jacqueline likely died in the fall of 2024 while her family was still residing in Farmington. Evidence indicates that Jacqueline was the victim of prolonged physical abuse and malnourishment prior to her death. It is also believed that following her death, Jacqueline's body was kept in the family's basement and subsequently moved when the family relocated from Farmington in March of 2025.
Fall of 2024, roughly an entire year. And the mayor of New Britain says a missing persons report was never filed for Jacqueline Torres. And this family, according to the mayor, was known to DCF. A lot of questions there about how no one noticed she was gone until her body was allegedly found behind a vacant house in New Britain, Connecticut last week. Now, we know that Jacqueline Torres, with her mom and whoever else, lived in Farmington, Connecticut for a period of time. That's about 15 minutes away from New Britain, where the girl's body was found. Authorities believe that Karla Garcia allegedly kept Jacqueline Torres's body in her basement, and then when the family moved to another location outside of Farmington, they took the remains with them. They believe this family moved in March of this year. And then last week, the body of Jacqueline Torres was allegedly dumped in the backyard of that abandoned home. Police say that Garcia was arrested on Sunday night. She is charged with murder under special circumstances and conspiracy, and she is being held on a $5 million bond.
Where the is my niece?
Now that is video that went viral on social media of Garcia being taken into custody shortly after Mimi's remains were found. This was reportedly taken by Jacqueline Torres's aunt. Police say that Mimi Torres was the victim of prolonged abuse and malnourishment. Police say Garcia's sister Jacqueline is also under arrest in connection to this case and Mimi's death. Here she is appearing before a judge today, right around the same time that her sister did in Torrington, Connecticut. She also appeared to be crying as well. Now, her bond is set at $1 million, and she is not charged with murder in this case. She is charged with unlawful restraint, risk of injury to a minor, and intentional cruelty to a person under the age of 19. Now, at the time that police held their news conference last night announcing the arrest of the Garcia sisters, one other person was wanted in connection to the case, and at the time of that news conference, he was still at large. His name is Jonathan Nanita, and he is Karla Garcia's boyfriend. Well, he was arrested overnight, and he made his first court appearance this morning in Connecticut as well. And you can see something happened to his face because he looks like he got beaten up. Now, he is facing charges including murder with special circumstances and conspiracy. Police say he was the one who allegedly dumped Mimi's body behind the house that prompted the call to 911 and prompted authorities to find those remains behind the home. To think that this young girl was not seen for a year is frankly shocking. It's sad to think, in the deepest and darkest of ways, that for the past 12 months, this girl was dead, according to police, and no one ever filed a missing persons report in connection to Mimi Torres. The mayor of New Britain also said that DCF was in contact with this family at some point, that this family was known to the state, and yet Mimi Torres was allegedly dead for 12 months, and the state didn't know anything about it. It is unclear what the contact did look like in the DCF case and how recent this family had communication with DCF. There is a lot to unpack in this case and a lot of questions still unanswered. In putting this story together, a really important tool for us is truthfinder.com because it helps us learn more information about the people involved in our stories. And in a story like this, where you have multiple suspects, it's a really important tool in figuring out where they lived and how they came together to allegedly take part in this crime. At Law&Crime, we partner with Truthfinder and we use it to get details on the people involved in our stories. But even if you don't work in true crime, it can be an excellent resource to give you some peace of mind as it's one of the largest public record search services in the United States. And with the paid subscription service, you get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone. And right now, you can get 50% off your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/OTC. Joining us now to talk more about this case is retired NYPD Detective David Sarney. We cover a lot of tough stories, and every story is tough and sad when it comes to cases involving children. But I will say, when I heard the mayor of New Britain say that this girl was dead since, or it might have been the police chief of Farmington, dead since November 2024, like it was just this chilling moment of realizing how evil what these people are accused of, how evil it really is. And I don't even know where to begin other than just I think there's going to be this big question of how does this happen? You have the abuse, but then the fact that it went for so long that no one asked where Jacqueline Torres was.
No, this is the problem and having because it's upsetting to see this continuously happen. And I understand child services are always extremely busy. There's not enough resources available. There's not enough investigators available. There's not enough time available. When it comes to parenting, you have an expectation they're going to be parents. They have a divorce proceeding. She gets custody. We don't know why. Apparently, DCF had them on the radar at some point, but there's no follow-up because if there's no active immediacy, a lot of times, child services does not interact immediately. There's been a lot of pushback against child services because they're worried about the rights of the parents, but we always forget the rights of the kids. We were always worried about these kids getting what they want, what they need. And to be out of the system, nobody knowing where she is, and then having this happen, and we've seen it time and time again. And it comes back to there's an adage in a movie called Parenthood. It's like anyone, you need a license to drive, but any a-hole could be a parent. And it seems in this case, the it looks like systemic torture of this child, selective torture of this child to physically abuse her. There's not one person who spoke out for her while she was alive. And that's the problem. Sometimes the state needs to intervene more when it comes to kids getting homeschooled. If that's what happened and she was pulled out of school, there should have been at least some sort of a division of homeschool services that they actually have personnel that can go to the houses and just make sure they're getting something, Zoom call, anything. Technology is available. You actually, if you get action and you see the person on camera, at least you have something. They did nothing. And she's on the radar, the family's on the radar, but to what extent? And it continues time and time again. The darkness and evil people have toward their kids at times is just mind-boggling.
It is, and this was a case too where, I mean, it just gets worse and worse. So as far as, before we get to DCF, because there are a lot of questions about exactly what happened and what type of contact the state had. How do you not have contact with the family? If you're on the radar, and then it was at least a year that no one saw this girl, and apparently there was just a lot of abuse leading up to her death. When it comes to the charges we're seeing right now, you have Jacqueline Garcia, who's the sister of Karla, who's the mom. She's facing, Karla's facing murder charges. Jacqueline, it seems like some abuse charges. And then the boyfriend, Jonathan, is facing charges of being an accessory to this, but it also seems like they believe he moved the body to that location in New Britain, in the back, where they end up finding this girl's body in the dumpster, or in a container near a dumpster.
Yeah, when you do the investigation, apparently now one caller identified, at least said there was someone putting the body there, and it might be the boyfriend at this point. I know he's been arrested. This investigation, you have, the problem is right now, I don't know if they're going to upgrade the charges for murder, because you're going to have a connectivity between the injuries and the abuse toward Mimi at this point, and connecting it to the boyfriend and the aunt. The daughter, the mom is easier to do because she had full custody of this child. So that's what they're looking for. And I believe that when you're dealing with the district attorney's office has worked really lockstep with the investigators. And that's why the charges are going to, they pursue, once police make that probable cause arrest, and which is they do, you have to get to that next level. And I believe with the lockstep of the district attorney's office, of the prosecutors in this case, they really see that this case is going to have legs to actually convict these individuals for the crimes, and maybe upgrade the crimes to the boyfriend and to the mother's sister.
And we know that obviously the arrest, we're still waiting on the court documents right now, so we'll see how they were able and what they'll say about uncovering what they believe happened. It does seem, as far as an investigation, I know this is where things get morbid, that they were able to piece together not necessarily the cause of death, but what was allegedly going on in her life, and the abuse and malnourishment they say happened to this child. And then eventually you get to a point 12 months later, roughly, where you have a badly decomposed body. But it does seem that law enforcement have been able to get a good amount of information to put a story together about what happened.
Yep, that's the benefit of this. And that's why you could actually, they're saying almost a year in which Mimi was dead. And they've held that body for over a year. And they transport the body from one location to the next. And then they decide, I guess they ran out of room, because who knows why they did what they did. And this is all, allegations against them. But, when you have the connectivity of the person dropping the body off is one part. The ME's office, I guarantee you, when it's for the decomposition, that's why when officers went to the scene, the first responders, the detectives, there wasn't enough they could see right then and there. That's why the autopsy was necessary, to determine that there was malnourishment, and that can be determined by the ME, by the doctors, to see how the body, a 12-year-old, what is a 12-year-old supposed to look like, or physically, even though they've decomposed, you can find something, and that's where they see. And going back to fill in the blanks of the investigators, when they can determine that she hasn't been seen in over a year, and they could actually find out the systemic abuse that was taking place by Mimi. And that's the whole thing about this case. Law enforcement can only do things when it happens, when the criminality is afoot. When DCF or any child services gets into these cases and we find criminality, we can make an arrest based on that. The prosecution part of it is going to be up to the DA, but we want to do the precursor and see why, if DCF is involved, when did the engagement take place? Why wasn't there a follow-up in any way, shape, or form? And it comes back to the same thing, the overwork of these agencies, because there are people out there, this is, when you deal with kids, the systemic abuse, we make the arrest, we find all the evidence to support that. But the reality is when they said justice is served at that press conference, justice isn't really served. We're finding out the truth as to what happened because Mimi's never going to get justice because Mimi's dead. Mimi's not longer on this planet. And that's the scariest part of all. Her father, good, bad, or indifferent, will never see his daughter again. The rest of her family will never see her again. Investigators look to find the truth, and that's what they're doing here, is they're finding out the truth as to what happened to Mimi. What unfortunately we cannot do is do anything before the criminality takes place. A lot of times we may engage with social services, but as far as police are concerned, this is what we do afterwards. It's, we deal with the criminality of, in this case, it was a missing, an investigate DOA, which is now determined to be, now it looks like it's a murder case.
How might they be able, because it's very specific to say, well, I said November 2024. I believe they said the fall of 2024. So I don't know what the specific date is where they believe the last time that she was alive. But how might they be able to track it to that time as opposed to, I know the dad had reportedly said that he thought it was sometime around January that he saw her because her birthday was on the 29th. Apparently it was much earlier than that, that authorities say that Mimi was killed. How do you actually piece together and find the day that she might have died?
You might not have a day particularly. That's why they have that time frame. That's the reason why when the father said January 29th, that gave us a time frame on his information. But then you have to actually confirm that information. Right now, we're trying to confirm the information available with this. And are we getting an exact date of when she disappeared? It's possible, but it's going to be based on interviews, canvases, any friends or associates she's ever had, any social media accounts she may have had that might have dropped off the system, any communication that the mother had with the sister and the boyfriend. That's where you're going to do all this. That's why when you talk about cell phone records, cell site towers, all these things come into play. Now, this is over a year. So that's the other issue. If DCF was involved, did they do any engagement? When was the complaint generated? When was a visit made? That's the other thing coming into play because police, we're going to do our work. That's why at the scene where the body is, you're going to probably go back and see if there were any other calls prior to that location because we have a date and time of when the body was dropped off. That's what we see right now. But now we have to go back into Mimi's life.
Yeah,
and that's what's going to take place, and it's not going to be easy.
No, and I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, she was untraceable. I mean, to think that there wasn't one person, friend from school, and we don't know when she was out of school, but it was believed that she was a student at some point, a friend, neighbor, anybody who had asked. And I know they moved from Farmington to another community, so that probably put them off a trail of having people that they knew. But, I also think too, I mean, you have 3 people who are accused of this horrific crime. And it's like, how do 3 people come together and everyone would go through with this? And I know that there's, that's kind of like a grand question that we often have in cases like this, but I wonder for investigators, especially with the aunt, if she's accused of abuse, she's going to face some serious time in prison. How do you go about potentially getting one person to turn on another person as you have these 3 people who are now all facing, and likely even if they cooperate, they'll be facing serious time in prison. But how do you go about trying to get one person as leverage on another?
Well, that's where the prosecutors have to go to the weakest link. Who do they either have the strongest case against that will turn on the others? But right now, if the mother's going to be the accused of murder, you're going to look at the other 2 to see if they will actually give evidence or give statements to that kind of a queen for a day thing. In lieu of either reduction of charges, reduction of time in prison, whatever it's going to be. That'll be up to the prosecution part of it. But what detectives are going to do now is they have to build the strongest case against all of them. So it makes the prosecutor's job a little easier to put that leverage against one or the other person. The mother was given custody. The mother, there was no missing persons report ever generated. So they covered this up. So there's a conspiracy aspect to this. Now, here's another question. I don't know if you can look to a federal aspect to this because they're transporting a body from city to city. It's not state to state. You could try to find weighing some leverage against them somehow. And that's where you look for the weakest link in this case. Would it be the boyfriend? Will it be the aunt who is involved? To what extent their involvement is in the systemic and apparently the systemic abuse of Mimi is something else. So the mom is the main target. But you want to build the case against all three, as the investigators are doing. So then if we want to have somebody turn on the other, to do that queen for a day, then we have the ability to do so, because the weight of the evidence against them is so overwhelming. Because right now, I'm not sure if they were going to, I think they're $5 million bond each. They're not going anywhere. So and the case isn't over yet. That's what people I sometimes forget, that just because they're arrested doesn't mean the investigation stops. It's a continuous investigation, because we have to build that case to support the charges against all three. And that's what you're doing, right? And that's what they're doing now. And that's why when you see, the joint operations between Framingham and New Britain, and also the state, because the state's involved, Connecticut State Police are involved, you want to make sure this case is sealed up tight. So if you want to turn and get the more evidence, we have to know how long the boyfriend was involved with the girl, with the mom, what relationship the aunt had with the mother, and all of these things will come into play with that investigation. So
it's just what a sad case. I think above all, shocking, and we'll see how the legal part of it plays out. But a lot of anger, and deservedly so, in Connecticut over this girl, and you just wish that there was someone along the way that had, whether it was DCF or the school district, someone had seen something ahead of time to think that this went on. Her body being hidden allegedly for a year is just, it's so unfathomable. Retired NYPD Detective David Sarney, really tough case here. Thanks for joining us to talk about it.
Thank you very much, and stay safe.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law&Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.